Have you ever been sure of something, only to be told it never happened? What if your memories started disappearing? What if reality itself began to change? Ethan Carter meets a woman who fears her mind is playing tricks on her. But soon, Ethan himself starts losing pieces of his past notes vanish. Names are erased, and even people he knew seem to have never existed. The more he searches for the truth, the more everything around him begins to fall apart. If our memories can be changed, how can we ever know what is real? This is the maze of the mind.
Part 1. Ethan Carter woke up suddenly, feeling his heart beating fast, and when he looked around the dark room, he saw a note sitting on his desk. He did not remember writing it, but when he picked it up and read the words carefully, his hands became cold and a strange fear filled his chest. The note said, "She was never real. Stop looking." Ethan read the message again and again, trying to understand why it was written in his own handwriting, but felt completely unfamiliar to him, as if someone else had written it using his hand. Then, suddenly, a name appeared in his mind, and a sharp memory rushed back to him, making him feel even more afraid than before. Claire Reynolds. She had come to his office only 3 days ago, and he remembered the way she had sat across from him, looking nervous and afraid, her fingers shaking as she held them tightly together. "Doctor," she had whispered, leaning forward as if she was afraid someone might hear, "I think my mind is lying to me, and I do not know what is real anymore." Ethan had looked at her carefully, trying to understand what she meant, before asking her to explain more about what was happening to her. Claire had taken a deep breath, and her eyes had filled with something that looked like fear and confusion mixed together. "I remember things that never happened, and I forget things that I know were real. And sometimes I hear my own voice in my head, but it says things that I would never think," she had said, her voice shaking as she spoke. At that moment, Ethan had believed that her mind was simply confused, because the human brain often makes mistakes, and people sometimes remember things in the wrong way, or imagine moments that never really happened. But now, as he looked at the strange note in his own handwriting and realized that he had no memory of ever writing it, a terrifying thought entered his mind. What if Claire was not just confused? What if she was right? And what if the same thing was now happening to him? Part 2. Ethan could not stop thinking about Claire, and as the hours passed, the fear inside him kept growing stronger, because he could not find any explanation for what was happening. The next day, he decided that he needed to see Claire again, because if he could talk to her one more time, then maybe he could understand what was going on and prove to himself that his memories were real. When he arrived at her house, he knocked on the door and waited, feeling his heart beating faster with every second that passed. Finally, the door opened, and Claire stood there, looking directly at him. But something was wrong, because the way she looked at him was not how a person looks at someone they remember. "Dr. Carter?" she asked slowly, her voice filled with confusion. "Do I know you?" Ethan felt his body freeze, because this was impossible, and for a moment, he could not find the words to speak. "Claire," he said, trying to stay calm, even though his hands were shaking. "We spoke just 3 days ago, and you came to my office, and you told me about your memory problem." Claire frowned and shook her head. "No, I didn't," she said, her voice firm, as if she was completely sure that she had never met him before. Ethan's stomach felt heavy, and the air around him seemed colder, because This did not make sense, and he knew that something was very, very wrong. "You do not remember me?" he asked again, but this time his voice was quieter, almost a whisper. Claire looked at him for a moment and then shook her head again. "I am sorry, but I think you have the wrong person," she said, her voice soft but certain. Ethan quickly opened the notebook he always carried with him and flipped through the pages, searching for the notes he had written about her. And there it was. Her name, Claire Reynolds. Her age, her details, everything he had written down after their first meeting. This was the proof he needed. This was real. But when he looked up again, something had changed in Claire's eyes, and she took a small step closer, tilting her head slightly as she looked at him. "You should forget me," she said softly, and her voice sent chills down his spine. Then, without another word, she closed the door. Ethan stood there, frozen in place, unable to move, unable to breathe, as the words repeated in his head again and again. Forget her. Why? Something was very wrong. He needed to find the truth, but the truth was already coming for him. Part 3. That night, Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He could not sleep. No matter how hard he tried, he could not stop thinking about Claire. The way she had looked at him was still in his mind. She had acted like she had never seen him before. But Ethan knew that was not true. He remembered talking to her in his office. He remembered every detail. She had looked nervous. She had whispered her fears. She had told him that she forgot real things and remembered things that never happened. Then there was the note, the one on his desk. The message written in his own handwriting. She was never real. Stop looking. Ethan took a deep breath. He had to stay calm. But the more he thought about it, the more confused he became. If Claire was not real, why did he remember her? Why did he have notes about her in his notebook? He reached for the notebook. He needed to check again. If he could see her name written in his own handwriting, then it meant she was real. But when he found the page, his body froze. Claire's name was gone. The notes were still there. His handwriting was the same. But the most important part, the name had disappeared. It was as if it had never been there. Ethan's hands shook. His forehead felt hot. His thoughts were spinning. This was impossible. Had he imagined Claire? Had he made her up without realizing it? No, that could not be true. He remembered her. The memory was too clear, too real, wasn't it? Then his phone buzzed. The sound made him jump. He picked it up and looked at the screen. His body went cold. There was a new message. "Stop looking, Ethan." No name, no number, just a warning. His fingers felt weak. Someone was watching him. Someone knew what he was trying to do. But the biggest question was, what would happen if he did not stop? Part 4. Ethan knew he should stop. He should listen to the message. He should forget Claire and move on. But he couldn't. Something was wrong. If he did not find the truth now, he might never get another chance. The next morning, he left his house early. He went straight to Claire's house. He needed to see her again. He needed proof that she was real. But when he arrived, he felt his heart stop. The house was gone. Not empty, not broken. It was like it had never been there. Just an empty piece of land covered in grass. Ethan stepped forward, his mind racing. He knew Claire's house had been there yesterday. He had seen it. He had spoken to her. And now it was erased. His breathing was heavy. he turned to an old man watering his plants nearby. "The house that was here, where is it?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking. The man frowned. He lowered his watering can. "What house?" he asked. "There was never a house here." Ethan's stomach dropped. His vision blurred. "No," Ethan said quickly. "That's not true. Claire Reynolds lived here. I talked to her yesterday." The old man sighed. He looked at Ethan with pity. "Son," he said gently, "I have lived here for 30 years. No one named Claire Reynolds has ever lived here. There was never a house on this land. It has always been empty." Ethan's hands felt cold. His head felt light. This was impossible. He had seen Claire. He had spoken to her. He had written about her. Then, suddenly, his phone buzzed again. His fingers trembled as he looked at the screen. There were 5 words. "You looked too far. Now we have to erase you too." Before he could react, his body felt strange. A dizziness washed over him. The world around him started to blur. Colors faded. Sounds disappeared. Ethan tried to move. He tried to call for help. But no one noticed him because, to them, he had never existed. Then, silence. Nothing. And somewhere, far away, a notebook sat on a desk. Its pages were blank. No names, no notes, no record of Ethan Carter. Because Ethan Carter had never existed.